Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm your host, Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House. You're with the disease-ridden Charles Coulombe.
Disease-ridden? You
Yes.
mean like I've got infection and virus and spores? Ugh. Eee. Yeah, it's like gross and everywhere.
Yeah. Gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Ooh, gives me the heebie-jeebies thinking about it. But yes, I was in fact positive. And when we were doing the show last week, I had a touch of fever, and I had to take my trusty Novalgin if I wanted to sleep because the lower back pain was so bad. But I really have not been in too bad a shape since Monday. And given that the hydroxyquine, or whatever it's called, that my brother sent me from the States has been held up in Austrian customs, they're not getting it to me. I'm afraid I can only really ascribe my apparent recovery thus far. I say apparent because it could be that there'll be a second wave for me. We won't know for a little while yet. But to the degree that I'm recovered, ladies and gentlemen, I owe it to the prayers of my friends, family, and you guys. And mind you, there have been hundreds of you, if not thousands, who have been praying for me and offering masses and so on. A few sending good vibes my way. I don't know what I was supposed to do with those, but I accepted them gratefully. So that's all to the good, and I hope that I'm out of the woods and that by this time next week I will be negative and we can go on to the next misadventure. Unfortunately, the COVID claimed the life this evening of my catechism and Thomism instructress, Dr. Danya Kiergaard, who I've known the past 3 years I've been here. Brilliant woman. She was in her late 80s. Her mind was as sharp and strong as her body was failing her before. And so she was diagnosed a week ago Wednesday and died this evening. But she was a very, very Orthodox, very faithful Catholic. She was a convert, Danish, was a little girl during the occupation of Denmark in World War II and the difficult period afterwards. I'm grateful to have known her. Very, very fine lady, and always quick with a smile. You know, she wore her learning, and she was brilliant, but she wore her learning lightly, and she was never grim. You know, demanding intellectually, but never grim. And I very grateful to have known her, and I will miss her for the rest of my days, as is the case with people you're fond of. So, you know, but she had a weak heart. She had a lot of things wrong with her. So she was the poster child for this kind of stuff. And in fact, we were all very much afraid when COVID got going that she'd get it, because this was pretty much the way we thought it would go if she did. And she avoided getting it for a long time. The school was very careful, but somehow she got it. And that was that. But she didn't have to retire from teaching due to her debility. She had, as I say, she had difficulties of different kinds. And I know that it would have really upset her to have given up teaching. So that indignity she did not suffer. So of your charity, ladies and gentlemen, please pray for the repose of the soul of Dr. Daniel Kiergaard. And please pray for my continued recovery, because you never know. This is a very tricky disease. And some people, they think they're over it and it pops back. I do have, although the Austrian customs held up the drugs and the finger thing, so I don't have anything like that. I did get one of the finger deals all on my own from Amazon. Tumblr House doesn't give them for some reason, but in pressing it, you put your finger in and you get to check your the level of oxygen in your blood. And in just a second, it will tell me 97. All right, that's good. My blood level is good. If it were 91, I would go to the doctor. Because one of the funny things about COVID too is that you can feel great, but your blood level, your oxygen level in your blood is eroding. And when that happens, your inner organs start to suffer. So now, ladies and gentlemen, you've had your exciting evening lesson on COVID and its joys. But wait, there's more. Because Monday, when everyone's going to be seeing this in real time, is, are you ready?
Yeah.
Haha. The first of the Rogation Days. Yes, the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday before Ascension Day are the Rogation Days. And these are wonderful. I mean, they're if you look up the prayers, either in Dom Guéranger or anywhere you like, basically you'd have a special Mass, a proper Mass, and afterwards a procession all around the boundaries of the parish. And this was also called beating the bounds. In some places, there were regular stops with the procession where they would beat the altar boys so that they would always remember where the boundaries of the parish were. You know how rural people were.
Wait, could you say that again? I don't think I heard that right.
Well, they would beat the altar boys so they would remember where to stop, where the boundaries of the parish were.
Why do you need to beat the altar boys in order to teach them that?
They get it in their heads so they remember. I mean, they didn't sit there beating them with rocks, just a quick smack, and then they'd move on.
I don't understand. I don't understand. Why don't they just tell the altar boys beforehand? I don't get it.
Because they might forget. But see, they get smacked, they'll remember. I remember.
So why don't we do that? Why don't we just, you know what, let's just revamp the entire educational system. So instead of telling people things, everything that we say is followed with a slap, lest they forget.
I would like to do that, actually, to students in universities. I'd like to do it to professors in universities even more. I'm just telling you the way they did it, okay? Mind you, this wasn't a universal custom.
That's just weird. I don't know. It's just weird. I would not want to be an altar boy. It's like, well, you want to do this procession? No, it kind of involves a beating, and I'm not too keen on getting beat up in this procession.
See, you got to understand that in those days, though, kids wanted to show they could take it. You know, and actually, I'm only half kidding. My brother is involved with the Civil Air Patrol, and he was taking a bunch of kids out to a site where there had been a crash. And one of the kids said to him, now these are high school kids, all right? They're not 4-year-olds. But he said, there won't be any bodies, will there? And my brother kind of chuckled because, you know, when we were kids, you would never have said that. You know, no matter, you would have, you know, you would pretend to want to be a man. You know, you wouldn't You wouldn't admit that you were disgusted, even though you might well be. You would never say something like that. You might hope to God you didn't actually have to see one, but you wouldn't say it. And if you did see one, you would try to man it out, as we used to say back in those days. But everyone's in touch with their feelings now. But at any rate, I don't necessarily recommend beating altar boys, but although it's better than doing anything else with them sometimes. Cardinal McCarrick, call your office. But the thing is that the Rogation Days are a wonderful, wonderful thing, partly for bringing down Christ's blessings upon the crops, partly for atoning for our sins, and they also breed a certain love of the locality. So if you're lucky enough to live in a parish that's going to do the Rogation Days, usually rural, but not always, join in. If not, you know what you can use the Rogation Days to do?
What?
Get to know your parish. Drive around its boundaries. See what's in it. Study the history of your church and who the founders were. I mean, take Holy Angels as an example. It's got a very interesting history. Guess what nationality founded it?
Spanish?
No.
Filipino? I don't know.
Filipino. No. There was a particular ethnicity that was big in the foundation of the Holy Angels Church.
I have no idea, Charles. It's a white parish. What?
It wasn't considered white in the old days. It was Italian. It was the Italian parish.
So that's why they have the ICF. Okay.
That's why they have the ICF. And Immaculate Conception of Monrovia, IC, was the Irish parish.
I don't like IC.
Well, it doesn't matter whether you like it or not. It was the Irish parish, and Holy Angels was the Italian parish.
But it makes sense that I wouldn't like it. I mean, because that's the Irish parish, and Holy Angels is the Italian parish. So it's funny how that works out, where I didn't even know that, but I had an affinity toward one and against the other. Isn't that interesting?
Well, Officer Clancy would have something to say about it. Where he goes to Mass.
Like a sixth sense.
You know where Officer Clancy goes to Mass?
I see.
Yep. Oh, sure, I love Immaculate Conception. The statue of St. Patrick. It's lovely. Just lovely, I tell you. And the big shamrock they've got on the floor in the tile as you come in.
I haven't gone there in like 20 years. Actually, that's not true. The one time I went in, it's because I had to go in, kind of, because it was one of the shrines for the Doors of Mercy.
Yeah. For the Mercy Jubilee year.
Yeah, that was one of them, and that was like the closest one. So I sucked it up and went in there.
Did you see the shamrock on the floor, boyo?
Are you serious? No, there's no way. There's no way.
Yes, there is. There is. It's a big shamrock in the not tile, but the linoleum.
Wow.
And there's a beautiful statue of St. Patrick. And now I have to say that my nephew and niece-in-law were married at IC. And that was actually kind of fun because they were going to have the Novus Ordo ad Orientem. But the deacon in charge of weddings there at the time said, "Oh, no, you can't do it ad Orientem." So I asked my nephew, "Would you like me to talk to him?" And my nephew said, No, it's okay, Uncle. I said, all right. Well, the priest who offered the Mass was the one who baptized my niece-in-law. So he goes in the day of the wedding, and I'm sitting there. He starts setting up not the table, but the altar for the ad Orientem Mass. And the deacon comes in and starts to yap at him. And the priest, to the day I die, I'll never forget this. The priest turns and says, "You're the deacon. I'm the priest. Go away." And that was it.
Beautiful.
It was very beautiful. Now, mind you, I would have enjoyed the chance to play with the guy, but
Silly deacon.
yeah, I would have told him. I said, "Well, how much money are you going to be losing on this deal?" "What?" "Oh, well, you see, deacon, we're only paying if it's ad orientem. If it's versus populum, you're not getting any money. How about that?"
All right.
You'd be surprised how that changes people's attitudes.
I know. I know. Look, we've developed a reputation for ourselves, Charles. We're big proponents of simony.
No. If we were selling something, we'd be Simoniacs. We ain't selling nothing.
Well, you're saying, in order to get priests to do what you want them to do, you offer them money.
No. It offered to encourage them not to do wrong. I don't pay them if they're bad.
I mean
otherwise
you're not encouraging priests to stick to their principles despite offers of cash.
We don't have any principles. And besides which, I mean, if I'm to follow out your reasoning, all right, basically, it's like saying that, all right, I'm going to hit my kid if he's bad. What you're saying is, oh, I see. You're bribing your children to be good by not hitting them when they're good. I get it.
You're overturning subsidiarity. You're turning subsidiarity on its head. They're the priest, you're the layman. Your job is to pay, pray, and obey.
Okay. But I get to choose who I'll pay. And if they want me to pay them, I'll certainly pray for them. And of course I'll obey them if they take my money. What?
Okay. Fair enough, Charles. I don't know. What?
Is it my fault? Let's say there's only one store in town. They sell meat, but they sell it at double the price that it's worth. But there's nowhere else I can buy meat.
Okay.
So is it a sin if I pay their inflated prices? Is it a sin for me? I mean, it's a sin for them, obviously. They shouldn't be gouging. But is it a sin if I pay their prices to get the steak I can't get otherwise?
No.
There you go. But aren't I encouraging them by paying their inflated prices?
Your metaphor doesn't hold up because...
I don't need the sacraments. Is that
because there's more meat in your town. There are more parishes. But you see, what you're saying is you're paying an extra to get a little something on the side.
No, I'm paying extra to get what I want.
Something on the side.
It's on the side.
It's off the menu. It is off the menu. It is quite literally off the menu. That's right. I just won by using that term appropriately.
Let me tell you something. This coming from a Franchini is rich. Just want you to know.
Oh. Now you're going to... Okay, well, you know what? That just means I won. Gonna do an ad hominem. Just ring that bell, Charles.
Let me tell you something. Since you bring it up, all
right.
Your Uncle Giovanni knew how to deal with the clergy, I'll tell you.
Oh, yeah? Tell us.
Oh, yeah.
Go on.
No, I'm just saying.
Oh, okay.
But he didn't pay money. Instead, he gave security.
That's right. That's how it should be.
What, threats are better than bribes?
You, it's not threats per se.
Yes, not threats per se. Father, it would be terrible if all of the pipes in the rectory blew, wouldn't it? That'd really set you back. He would never have threatened a priest physically. Never. He was very pious.
All right.
Gee, too bad about your car, Father.
All right, Charles. All right.
Anyway, all kidding aside, no, I think you have to accept people for who they are and where they're coming from. I know that you should project your view of what a priest should be like onto the priests we actually have.
Didn't you just do that, but with money?
No, I know what they're like. And so I give them what they need. I don't see, you would look at it and say, oh, fathers should be virtuous and do it just because it's the right thing to do. Yes, I'm sure he should. But unfortunately, in the world that I've lived in, that's not how it works. Now, mind you, that's primarily, of course, the priests of my generation and older. The younger ones are a whole different kettle of wax. Thank God. And I don't want to characterize all the older ones as awful either. But so many of them are. And the only way you can deal with them is in ways that they'll understand. And very often that means simply lowering the boom on the finances. You don't want to do this and such, Father. All right, I get it. I understand. But you'll do it for free.
All right, Charles. We have exhausted this. Let us move on to the memes of production.
Oh, but what are we supposed to do with them?
We're supposed to nationalize them, of course.
To what end?
For the common good.
Ooh, someone's been reading his Integralism book.
I'm glad you did that, Charles, because we did it on the pre-show.
We did.
But we didn't mention it on the full episode. I just got this book. I finally got access to this book. This is the book on integralism. This is... I just started reading it. It's so good. Highly recommended. On the Tumbler House bookstore. It's $32. But you know what that means?
Yes, I do. It means free shipping and handling.
That's absolutely right. Just buying this book alone, you get free shipping and handling. So I've only got 30 copies in the store, and once we're out because these were incredibly hard to procure. I'm not going to be able to do it again. So
act now while supplies last.
Truly. Every other time we're just joking, but this time while supplies last. Limited time offer.
Void were prohibited.
Operators are standing by.
Sorry, no CODs.
And that's perfect to move into our memes of production.
As one does.
As one does. One from Philip. And he says operators aren't the only ones standing by. We've got this
apparently not.
Anti-lunatic squad driving around.
Yes.
On standby.
I understand they've been driving around the Tumbler House Tower more frequently in hopes of picking off stragglers.
All right. So we had you had a fascination with Twiggy, maybe a month or so, or a couple months back. Twiggy being a popular figure in the 60s, I guess, some model or something.
Yes, she was. She was the Twiggy.
Yeah. So
feed Twiggy.
Oh yeah, feed Twiggy. That's great. So Catherine sent in so from the Christmas story, the take on that, what brought you to this lowly state? It was Twiggy neglect.
That's true. Twiggy
Oh,
has been terribly neglected. There have been decades of Twiggy neglect, and I hold the entire country collectively guilty.
it's a shame.
When, when was the last time that you heard Twiggy mentioned in a presidential address by any sitting president? Yeah, see? Twiggy neglect, I'm telling you.
Sad.
Have you ever heard Twiggy spoken of from the pulpit? No, I don't think so. Has the Pope mentioned Twiggy? Not once.
Incredible.
I'll
All right.
say.
And last one is from Katie, which isn't so much of a meme. It's something that's really cool. She's a patron, and she says, earlier on a family field trip at the botanical gardens, I was explaining that ferns reproduce via spores. When Jude, who's 13 years old, chimes in, except on St. John's Eve when they have seed. Thanks, Charles and Tumbler House.
That's true. That's true. And we're the same authorities will tell you that Easter is the one day of the year when bunnies lay eggs.
That's right.
See,
When St. John's Eve? Is that the end of June?
no, it is the evening of June 23rd. So it's coming up.
Yeah. All right.
It's coming up, and then I have to be in Korneuburg for a parade on June 23rd, presuming that I'm recovered. And between then and early July, I've got something going on in LA. So that's the window where if I'm going to make it back this summer, that's when I've got to get back.
Yeah, you got a couple things. You better not. Yeah, definitely. When do you when do you have to go back?
Come back here?
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure. I presume in August or September.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll have you for a good amount of time.
Yeah. Well, I
hopefully.
I plan to do some book touring.
Yeah.
So let that be a lesson to those of you out there with either bookstores or shrines to Kaiser Karl. I will be available for book signings.
If you have the money, Charles has the time.
You are so right. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, you don't have to fly me out first class. You don't have to put me up in the best hotel. All I ask is the flight, that you park me, you feed me, you pay me, the honorarium to be discussed depending on what your group can afford, and you give me the chance to do a bit of a reading, a bit of a signing, and so forth. And I can come to you, presuming, of course, that I'm recovered and not one with the ages by that time.
Okay. All right. That has me excited. I'm just excited at the prospect of you coming back home.
It's been a long time. I haven't been home since February of last year. I'm coming home to a new country with a new administration.
Did we press the reset button, or are we wanting to press the reset button?
On what?
On everything. To transform our society into our new wonderful image.
Oh, you betcha. You bet. Absolutely. I say press it, reset. Absolutely. Yeah. Everything will be better. You'll see. Actually, Musso and Frank's is reopening. Actually, they're already reopened. The Derby is reopening. All my favorite heavy food houses. It looks like I'm coming back to an approximation of the LA I left to some degree.
You know what's weird? It just occurred to me, just the reset button. Doesn't that mean to go back? Like, let's hit the reset button. Let's rewind this a little bit. Let's rewind this story.
All right, let's rewind it to 1971.
Can we go a little bit further back?
1951?
That's better. That's definitely good. I mean, you got the right idea, right?
Yeah. Well, how about 1913?
Who was president? Woodrow Wilson?
Oh, God. All right, 1911, President Taft.
That's pretty good. I mean, that's definitely. I
It's
mean,
an improvement.
we're before like all the income tax stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, it's nice, but remember, there's no polio vaccine. There's none of the medicines.
Well, we're talking about like legally speaking, like.
Oh, we're picking and choosing.
Yeah, we are picking and choosing. It's like I want to live in a dwarven kingdom, right? But it's got to have electricity and running water. And like, come on.
And the internet.
And the internet, yeah. Like, come on.
So basically, you want Minas Tirith with Wi-Fi.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. All right. No, that's fine. I don't mind. But where I don't want technology is in the military.
What's behind that?
Tanks, self-propelled howitzers, to say nothing of missiles, bombs, etc. No. The military, I would say, although it's still it can still be quite lethal. I would say we'll freeze it at about 1700.
Ooh. Yeah, so that's like that's Last Samurai type stuff, no? Right?
Yeah.
Because like because that's what I always think about, like when you're talking about like advantages of military technology, and it's like that fight scene, spoiler alert, where the samurai with swords are like fighting against like howitzers. And
yeah, that's a bit rough.
That's a rough deal, man.
Yeah, we gotta get rid of the howitzers. And again, no Polish lancers against tanks. We're not doing that.
Yeah.
Lancer against Lancer. The old story of the Austrian cavalry officer.
The story of the Austrian. Okay, yeah.
In World War I. Oh yeah, this was told to me. It was very, very impressive. The old man asked about Tadpole, and he says, Tadpole. It was terrible. He was a lancer in Ulan, as they say. There we were, Ulans against Cossacks. The fortunes of war had gone against us this day, and we were separated from the main body of the regiment. There we stood, 2 against 1,000. I turned to my subaltern and said, in no way could we prevail against such odds. We must flee. So we fled. Uhlans pursued by Cossacks, 2 against 1,000. Faster they chased us, faster we sped, through moor and woodland and fen and swamp. Onward they chased, onward we rode, faster and faster and faster. Finally we came to a box canyon. We could go no further. We turned to face them, 2 against 1,000. So at this point I was, what happened then? We got both of them.
Oh, wow. Wow. Oh, man.
Nothing quite like old war stories, huh?
That's a good one. Well, you got me inspired now, Charles. Let's take this on a tangent. Let me, since we're talking about military technology, what can you tell us about catapults and trebuchets? Like, when did they start? Were there any?
The ancient world, Romans, Carthaginians, and all that. That's old stuff. And it, they would use rocks and various projectiles. Yeah. There was also in the ancient world something they called Greek fire, which we don't know how to make, but it was the method is lost. But it was sort of a napalm before napalm.
Mm.
And it was just what it sounds like. It was flame. It was like sterno or something. It was a flame thing.
Yeah.
And they might wrap, take a catapult. You put Greek fire on the rock, fling it into the city.
Yeah.
And don't kid yourself. I mean, that stuff could cause some real damage. You get hit by one of those things, and you're toast. And also, don't forget too that because they didn't know the medicine we have, wounds that would not be fatal now would be fatal then, because they get infected.
Yeah.
And there was nothing they could do about it. It's just like in the 19th century, a very common cause of death amongst children was what's called lockjaw, which you would get from getting hit or cut. And once it set in, there was nothing to be done. It killed you. So you got to bear in mind that technology has both allowed us to prolong life and to save lives that would not have been saved, but also to kill many more people than we could before. And of course, what one wishes is that the technology to save life could be maintained, and that of taking it away could be hobbled.
Yeah, it seems like most of history is based on our misuse of power and technology.
It's the fall of man.
Yeah.
I mean, we have like a Midas touch in reverse. And usually whatever we put our fingers to, we turn to crap.
Yeah.
But, it's not all that. It's not always that way. And of course, the stuff that we focus on are the good things. It's what nostalgia is like, whether it's personal or larger nostalgia. When you're feeling nostalgic about your youth and your childhood, you're not nostalgic for being picked on or having acne. That's or fretting about whether or not you're going to get a date for the dance. I guarantee you, when you get nostalgic about high school, those are not the things that you're thinking of. You're thinking about being young, and strong, and having the whole world ahead of you. You think of your best friends in school. You don't think of your worst enemies. You don't really. That's not what you're nostalgic for. And similarly, when you're nostalgic for historic eras, obviously, if you're nostalgic for the Old South, it's the moonlight and magnolias you're in favor of, not slaves. If you're nostalgic for the Middle Ages, it's the pageantry and the banners flying and all that kind of stuff. It's not the Black Death. Our nostalgia is perforce selective because, well, I mean, again, if you're nostalgic for the 1920s, it's flappers and the styles and the booze that you're nostalgic for. You're not nostalgic for Al Capone shooting up the place.
Yeah.
And so it is with everything. Because nostalgia in that sense is not really a yearning for the past. It's a yearning for what was best. That is to say, it's really a yearning for heaven. It's just that since we've never been to heaven, we focus on things that are somewhat more concrete.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that where if you look at basic human motivation and yearning, really the root is for something heavenly. Like you could say perhaps our culture is so sex obsessed, but really what the yearning is therefore is divine intimacy. Wouldn't you say? Like I'm remembering of what one of our speakers at high school said is that people, what they really want is intimacy, but what they settle for is sex.
Yeah.
I mean, and obviously the two aren't mutually exclusive, but so often the way our society treats them, they are. But so does that make sense though, that there's this yearning for this great intimacy, and that can be.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And you could multiply this by all sorts of things. You look, for instance, at food and drink.
Yeah.
You know, you think, hey, have you ever had a situation where you're hungry for something, but you're not quite sure what it is,
Yeah.
and you think over, do I want that? No, not it. How about no? That's not it. What is it I want? Same with drink. Um, you think of how many people go in for foodieism. You know, you think of Julia Child as the great kitchen goddess and so forth. That too is a yearning for heaven, or the sport that you love.
Yeah.
The when you talk to people who are athletes, do they enjoy getting banged around and hurt? No, but there are elements of it when they feel alive and almost ecstatic.
And another thing I think is an example of heavenly yearning is so much political discussion, especially on social media, where you look at someone and someone says something unbelievably stupid, and you wonder how could that person be stupid? Well, what is underneath that? In my opinion, what's underneath that is a desire for unity, for peace, because you want to be united with that person. You know, you want to be simpatico, but it's not happening, and where you get frustrated is it's not happening for stupid reasons. But underneath it all, in my opinion, is that desire for unity and peace.
And you know what's interesting too, though, that same desire shows itself in two opposite ways. What do I mean by that? Well, you know that human beings, on the one hand, we have a unitive sense, politically speaking, and that is the uh, motive behind the United States, the European Union, the United Nations, is this desire to gather mankind into a larger whole. But there's also an equally powerful opposite force, which is to be among our own, nationalist or you know, whatever you like. So in other words, on the one hand, we want to embrace all mankind, but on the other hand, we want to be extremely particularist and provincialist and just our own people.
Yeah.
But both impulses are actually looking to heaven.
It's interesting.
Now, this is why none of these impulses can ever be satisfied on earth. No political program will deliver. Ultimately, death itself stands in the way of the achievement of anything, ultimately. Which is why our biggest concern has to be ready for death, if it comes to us. And come to us it shall. So, anyway,
I'll end this with a book plug. This all reminds me of the book I plugged 2 weeks ago or so, The Quest for Happiness by Venerable Louis of Granada, where,
yes.
I mean, he's saying that our end, our only happiness is God. We're designed to be with God, and nothing else satisfies.
Very true.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Oh, we have a fun question for the first one from Mr. Fugu.
Okay.
Superfan Mr. Fugu. He says, when is Charles finally going to take his rightful place as the Grand Caudillo of the Republic of Igneous Native Kinsmen?
Well, I wouldn't hold my breath on that one, Durango. I have no idea what it means, so I would be patient. Who knows? It might happen.
You're the one talking about igneous American rights and.
Well, yes, I believe that igneous Americans have rights and that we have been discriminating against them too long. Only the Unitarians really understood.
What about the Alco-Americans?
Oh, them in particular. I really want to stand up for those guys. See, since in our society we erect quasi-ethnic group status on the basis of behavior, it is time for the Alco-Americans to be accepted for who we are. I think that it's an utter disgrace that right now an Alco-American who's just driving his car down the freeway, weaving gently, could be pulled over and lose his license like that. If he was known as an Alco-American, he could lose his kids. They wouldn't allow him to handle heavy equipment or high explosives. I mean, but this has to change. This has to end. One day, after we've had our million drunks stagger around the White House, one day, alcohol awareness programs in schools will allow children to decide for themselves how much, what, and whether to drink. It is not up to adults. I mean, look, if kids have the right to change their gender, they certainly have the right to decide whether or not to drink and smoke as well. If a kid has the right to alter his, her, or its gender, they must have the right to smoke or drink whenever and wherever they choose.
Because we touched on all this before, where I was kind of showing you that the age of consent has been lowered to 16 in most states, or many states, and I think you were in denial that you couldn't handle that reality because it's so unbelievable, because that means that people can fool around before they even have the right to vote.
Yep.
It's very strange.
Well, what it means also is that I can seduct a 16-year-old, and that's okay. But if I give her a drink afterwards or a smoke, I'm contributing to the delinquency of a minor. How about that?
Oh, what tangled webs we weave.
And oh, whose throats I'd love to weave them around. Real tight.
But the Alco-American thing is fun because I think that's such a potent point that you make regarding what's the term you use? Quasi-ethnic?
Quasi-ethnic group.
Yeah, based on behavioral choices.
On behavior.
Yeah.
I mean, what about adulterous Americans? See, people don't speak up for them, do they? No.
Well, no, there's a different term for that. We call that polyamorous now.
Golly.
No, I'm serious. I'm actually serious. Like, that is actually a thing. Like, one of my friends had was trying to catch up with one of her old friends who became polyamorous, I guess. And that's, I guess, a lifestyle choice, quote unquote, now,
But you know how you know that all this is phony?
How?
In my lifestyle choice, I've chosen not to pay taxes.
No, you can't do that.
Oh, suddenly it all changes. Oh, yes.
But, the polyamorous thing that is actually the saddest thing in the world, because if you think about that, what's underneath that in terms of that decision is that person actually doesn't believe in romantic love, or perhaps love in general.
Well, I mean,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, the whole friends with benefits thing is pretty pathetic.
Yeah.
I mean, gosh, what an utter pile.
Yeah.
What an utter bleak, sad, lonely, loveless existence. And again, you've got to pay for it, because the internal revenue will still come down on you. That's one of the things that I find so hypocritical about all this stuff. It's all done, same with the critical race theory, and the yapping about systemic racism, and just Oh, shut up.
Well, the thing that's alarming, we kind of haven't talked about it or addressed it directly, perhaps, but this past year, what's so alarming to me is that the state is so directly functioning like a church in that the decisions it makes, the people are trusted implicitly as if it's infallible. Like, oh
Oh,
yeah, the government says we're going to do this now, so it must be true. And
see bloody how.
instead of invoking the Holy Spirit, they invoke science. I mean,
Which,
it's like a diabolic mimicry of the Catholic Church. You know what I
and
mean?
it's also bad science.
Well, of course,
Science is
yeah,
not a matter of belief. That's why that very phrase, believe the science. No, you test the science, you question the science. You see, it's bad religion, it's bad science, it's just garbage. And it is what we have become. But who knows? Things can always get better.
yeah. My message of hope is you don't know what God is cooking underneath. You know,
No,
the motif of the mustard seed that began with the Holy Family. You know, this underneath the surface, nobody's, they're not at the top level. They're not
no, they
in.
weren't. And when they were in exile in Egypt, they were completely out of the picture.
Yeah.
So, at
And
any rate,
yeah.
ladies and gentlemen, don't despair. Just one thing, though, you should bear in mind: life today is so lonely and so sad and so bleak. At the risk of sounding like a Hallmark card of more like Pollyanna than polyamorous, I take no. I don't apologize for that. Do be kind to your loved ones and your friends and all that. Just be genial. Be Everybody's on edge with reason. So try not to be. Try to be the kind of company you would like to have. I'm not going to do the prayer of St. Francis, but it's not a bad way to go.
That is part of my daily regimen, actually. Right after the morning offering, I say the prayer of St. Francis. Here's a trick about the prayer of St. Francis, though. You can actually say it for selfish reasons because there's a great paradox here. In being selfless and being worried about everyone else, you're going to be happy because you're not worried about you. You're worried about other people. Like, you're not like, oh, I need all this money, or I need to do this, or I need this for me, I need that for me. When you're actually living the prayer of St. Francis, which I do in very fleeting moments, you're actually in a good way.
Well, and it gives you some really good advice for dealing with other people. And I can't recommend that kind of behavior more highly. If everyone around you is being crazy, try to be sane. If everyone around you is being cold and nasty, try to be warm and pleasant.
All right, questions time.
All right, what do we got?
All right, first one's from Andrew, who says, I was only a child when she was in the public eye, so I was wondering if Charles could explain the background and history of Diana, Princess of Wales. I think I heard Charles say in a recent episode that she was forced on Prince Charles. What did he mean by this? Also, not to get too into the weeds regarding conspiracy theories, but I would also appreciate if Charles could explain the circumstances surrounding her death and why some people believe she was killed by the royal family.
Well, basically, I say she was foisted on him because he had had several other inamorata who were not deemed suitable. One of whom, at least, was a royal. She was a princess of Luxembourg, but she was Catholic. I personally think she would have been the best choice for him, but nobody asked me. And he was getting older. He needed someone personable. She came from not a royal but a noble family. I forget the details. I've read them. I forget the details of how they met and were introduced. But the folk around the royal family, the office around them, as you might say, thought she was a brilliant catch and just what was needed. And the problem, of course, is that while initially they got along well enough with each other, she was not what you would call a deeply intellectual individual, and he was and is. And she had no interest in his enthusiasms, and she bored him. So that was ready-made trouble. As far as the conspiracy goes, after the divorce, she started dating the son of the Middle Eastern gentleman who had bought Harrods, the great department store in Kensington, where I myself have purchased, haven't sold anything there. But her death under very tragic and bizarre circumstances. She and her boyfriend were attempting to escape paparazzi in a tunnel in Paris, and they ended up crashing instead. It's the kind of thing that couldn't help but seem like a conspiracy. The deathbed of the great is the seedbed of legend, is an old saying. It's very true. If you or I died under exactly the circumstances she had, nobody would say it was a conspiracy. But the fact was that she was dating this guy who was very unseemly for the former Princess of Wales to be dating. And, a lot of people were of the opinion that had she lived, she would have gone from one scandal to another, because she just didn't show a great deal of discretion, shall we say. She has very vocal defenders to this day. I have to admit, I was never a great fan. I'd be lying if I said I was. I'm not. I'm not happy she's dead, of course. Interestingly enough, I was kind of forcibly invited to her memorial service in Los Angeles the week after the funeral in London. And that was kind of strange. She never came to LA. But the funny thing about Los Angeles is that while things happen in other parts of the world, we feel them more. So, when they had the big tidal wave in Thailand, yes, it was bad. People were killed and so forth. But Los Angeles went wild because we feel these things more than the people who actually go through them. LA is much more sensitive, you see. So I was invited to the service for the Princess of Wales at St. James, Wilshire, a week after, as I say, the funeral in London.
What?
Well, firstly, the then British Consul General knew me and my work with the Monarchist League, and he thought it would be a good thing for me to show up. And I said, well, I've got Mass on Sunday, and I really couldn't go. He said, your Mass is in the morning. This is 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You'll have time. And I said, well, and he said, I would consider it a favor if you came. And I said, well, all right. Well, there were 2 days between my getting the invitation and my getting down there. And I learned from other people I knew who were going, that it was supposed to be by invitation. And you were supposed to have your name on a list. Well, I had no invitation. My name was on a list. And to make things even worse, an old friend of mine, who you may remember, Jim Thomas, who was in his heyday, he was kind of a politico in New York, but he was at this time living in LA. Jim heard I was going, and he had to see this thing. He was sure it was going to be a dog and pony show of some kind. I said, well, all right, come with me. So we go down. Long story as to how we finally got in, because, of course, we weren't on the list and so forth. We were about to leave and go to Musso's and have a private wake, because there was no way we would have gotten in with the long line. They had 4/5 of the church reserved for VIPs, the back fifth for the public, and there was a line around the block to get in.
What church?
St. James, Wilshire, Episcopal Church. It's where the British colony usually have its services and so forth, that kind. So, I mean, later I would go to a service for the Queen Mother there, which was much more sane than this thing was. So we were about to leave, but finally the Consul General's secretary came and grabbed us and said, well, the Consul General says you're to come with me. So I did. We sat 5 rows back. Now the front pew was empty. So Jim says to me, well, who do you think's going to occupy the front pew? I said, well, if this were in Europe, royalty, nobility, somebody. But in LA, I don't have the foggiest notion who's going to occupy the front pew. Well, a second or two later, our question was answered. A side door opened, and in filed Michael Jackson and his entourage. And he was wearing a mourning band on the wrong arm, but he was wearing one. It was purple because he was wearing black, which was correct. And Jim says to me, that's sad when Michael Jackson is the last upholder of tradition. And then he thought about it and said, where's Bubbles? Bubbles, of course, being Michael Jackson's chimp, who would travel with him everywhere in those days. And I said, unlike Her Majesty, Bubbles is being allowed to mourn in private. But that wasn't quite the end of it, because first they had Michael York come out. The service itself was a weird mix of PC and stuffy. And out came Michael York, the actor. And he gave a eulogy. And he said, the last time, remember this was under President Clinton, so Hillary was the first lady. The last time I saw the princess was at a dinner in Washington earlier this year at the White House. And she outshone all that bright company to include such lights of our day as the First Lady and Barbara Walters. And I thought you wouldn't have to shine very, very bright to outshine them. But that wasn't as bizarre as what the rector of the place said when he got to the pulpit. He said, the princess was like a candle in the wind through which the Holy Spirit blew. I kept a straight face. It was hard.
You know, it seems the way you told the story that you knew it was going to be this whacked.
Yes and no. I had a feeling it would be, but I couldn't know the specifics. You know, so you got to remember too that LA had been doing its best. The flags were at half-mast the week before. She'd never been to LA. She'd never been to the city. The books of condolence there were lines around the block to sign them. I mean, people were being interviewed on TV. How do you feel about the loss of the princess? Oh, I don't know how I'm going to go on. But that's typical of Los Angeles. You know, the real stuff may happen elsewhere, but we feel it more deeply than anyone else. It's true. It's like when Jackie died. I mean, you know, you could see books of remembrance and lines around the block in New York, because she actually did a good deal for the city. Jackie Kennedy Onassis, I mean. But not LA. She had nothing to do with Los Angeles. Nothing. It's just crazy. Just utterly crazy.
You know, it's funny. When you're building up the hype over who is going to be in that first row, I thought, who could really get that honor?
That was my thought.
And then when you said Michael Jackson's family, I
Not his
thought,
family, his entourage.
or his entourage, I thought, of course, course, that rings true.
Well, when they came in, it made perfect sense.
It made perfect sense. Yeah.
But as a result, I'm the only man you know who can honestly say he's been to church with Michael Jackson.
Wow. That's... Wow.
You know who else I am, that I'm the only man you know who can say what I'm about to say?
Well, I'm sure there's a host of things, but go ahead.
Well, this is true, but this is another one. This was a couple of years later in 1999. I was in Romania, in Bucharest, and I had been hired to give a couple of talks on monarchy by Romanian monarchists in Bucharest and in Timișoara, which is a town in Banat on the Danube. But in Bucharest, the talk was in the former Royal Palace, now the Royal Art Museum, the National Art Museum. So I gave my talk, and then there was a reception afterwards, and then we finished. But what I didn't realize, no one had told me, is that the Holy Father, John Paul II, would be offering Mass in the square immediately below. So I finished my talk, we finished the reception, and we try to leave. But the Pope's security won't let us go. And we basically were stuck in the building until the Pope finished and left. And so, just as I'm the only man you know who can say he's been to church with Michael Jackson, I'm also the only man you know who was held prisoner by St. John Paul II in the Royal Palace in Bucharest.
That's so stupid. Just the title of...
That's right. Papal prisoner tells all. Oh, the sizzling exposés I could write.
Oh, man.
Youngest living member of the Criswell Circle comes clean. I have a lot of awful revelations. I just can't find anyone willing to buy them. It's all kind of meaningless stuff, you know?
All right. Moving on.
As one does.
Question from Robert.
Okay.
I would like to ask Charles on the Jacobite tradition and the movement as a whole. What is it? How did it come to be? What are its core tenets? How is it still relevant today? And also, if there's time, I'm also curious on what he meant in Star Spangled Crown when he indicated there that King George embraced the Jacobite tradition. And what does he think would be the best course of action for future British monarchs in regaining royal prerogative in their realms based on the current context?
Well, those are good questions. Basically, the Jacobite movement was the attempt after 1688 and the so-called Glorious Revolution to restore the rightful bearers of the throne, the rightful inheritors of the throne, the House of Stuart, to the throne and crown usurped first by William of Orange and Queen Mary, the suant daughter of James II, then by her sister Queen Anne, and then by the House of Hanover, down to the extinction of the main line of the House of Stuart in the year 1807, with the death of Cardinal York, de jure Henry IX. So it basically the Jacobite Wars were first fought in Ireland, a little bit in England in 1688, the so-called Glorious Revolution. The following year in Scotland, which saw the Battle of Killiecrankie, where the Jacobites won, but because their great leader, Bonnie Dundee, was killed, that kind of ruined the cause in Scotland at that point. And then the scene shifted to Ireland, and with the Battle of the Boyne, that was the end in 1690 and 91 of the wars in Ireland. Then in 1715, 1719, and closest to victory, 1745 to 46, the Jacobites attempted military success and failed. And then there were several plots to try to restore the Stuarts through other means. None of it worked, obviously, which is why the current house is on the throne today. But the differences were the following. Firstly, because the House of Stuart were Catholic, an end to civil disabilities for Catholics and other non-Anglicans in the three kingdoms of England, Scotland, and Ireland. The king to rule as well as to reign. Now that, again, our idea of quote-unquote absolute monarchy is kind of skewed by the fact that we live under a regime that can order the murder of tons of babies and nobody minds, can change the nature of what is human, what gender is, what marriage is. We live under a regime that can do all this, that can confine us to our houses, that can completely change whatever it likes because it feels like it. So our problem is we use these words and we don't know what they mean. We talk about an absolute monarchy. We have never lived under a government as non-interventionist in our lives as those that we're pleased to call absolute monarchies. So see, we don't really know what that's like. But basically, the king would set policy rather than the politicians who replaced him under the various usurpers. Also, local liberties. I said set policy. That's at the top, at the national level. But to the degree possible, the three kingdoms, as opposed to the union of kingdoms, which the usurping regime went for, the three kingdoms would retain their independence, but under that, the provinces or counties in their cases, and under them, the cities and towns, would have the maximum amount of freedom. We call today subsidiarity. Also, the idea that the peoples of those three kingdoms were, while on the one hand governed the most at the lowest level, on the other, conceived of themselves as being part of a great family of whom the father was the king. And that sense of opposition to class warfare and all that we call today's solidarity. That was the basic program. And in those bare outlines, it had a lot in common with similar movements like French legitimism, Spanish Carlism, Portuguese Miguelism, and so forth. Now, what I meant in the book was pretty much what you would guess for what I've just said. It meant that the then king assumed control of governance in the way that the Stuarts had done before 1688. Or to put this another way, he became like the President of the United States, only hereditary. Now, of course, the great irony is that if you did have a king with the powers of the presidency, people would be far less likely to allow him to usurp further power, precisely because he's hereditary. We've allowed our presidents all power under heaven and earth because of the illusion of control that elections give us. But people tend to be much more suspicious of people they don't vote for than of people they do. So, what would that mean in real life? Well, the king would assume active control of the army and foreign affairs. He would appoint his ministers, the cabinet would be responsible to him. He would exercise the veto over parliamentary bills he didn't believe were good for the realm. But you see, the difference between the presidential veto and the royal veto is that the president has to do things not simply as head of the nation, but as leader of his political party. And he's either trying to get reelected or get his successor elected, and certainly trying to maintain his party's control of Congress. In a setup of the sort I speak of, the king would be in a position to set long-term policy, although he'd have to figure a way to get his legislation through Congress, or through Parliament rather, even as the president does today. The difference being that it would not be a question of what would benefit one or the other political grouping, but what the king conceived would benefit the realm as a whole. Similarly, on the Commonwealth level, Canada, Australia, and all that, the king would appoint the governors general and the Canadian provincial lieutenant governors, the Australian state governors, without the advice of the prime minister, but entirely on his own. He would appoint the officials who were given to exercise his powers in his name. That's how it would work, in my humble estimation. Do I think it would be a perfect system? I do not. Do I think there would be problems? I do. Do I think it would work out better than what we have now? Yes.
Right. Question from James.
Okay.
Why was the Habsburg inheritance of Spain an overall good thing? Consider that Spain, instead of focusing its efforts on expanding and consolidating its overseas colonies, was drawn heavily into Habsburg wars in Europe instead, like the Italian Wars, the 80 Years' War, and the 30 Years' War, which sapped it of both blood and treasure. I would also argue that Catholic France played an even more crucial role than Protestant England in dismantling the unity of Christendom due to being surrounded by Habsburg dominions. Ooh.
Well, I'd say several things. Firstly, you're right about the unfortunate role played by France, sadly. Although their motivations were not nearly as bad as England's. As far as the benefits Spain derived, one thing you got to bear in mind is that Spain was already in Italy before the Habsburgs ever came to the throne. The King of Aragon was the King of Sicily and the King of Naples and the King of Sardinia. So it wasn't the Habsburgs that put him in Italy. It certainly was the Habsburgs that got them into the Netherlands. That's certainly true. But you've got to remember that a lot of the troops that they used in their colonies came from Belgium, the Walloons, from Italy, and so forth. It was far from a one-way street. And of course, it was the pre-existing experience of Aragon with their Italian possessions that inspired, in a lot of ways, what they did in the Spanish colonies. Certainly, Charles V put an awful lot of his own funding into the initial conquests of Mexico and Peru. And whether Spain could have afforded to do that on her own is a whole other question.
Okay. Question from Jody.
All right.
I was in class earlier this week, and my medieval professor made a comment about Blessed Charlemagne, that he was brutish, dumb, and the only reason he was king is that he was violent. He also said that he essentially plagiarized his ideas from his court. I thought this was very disrespectful and would like Charles to comment on what my professor said and form a rebuttal defending medieval kingship.
Well, firstly, I would say that your professor is probably projecting his own qualities onto Charlemagne. How did he describe him again?
Let's see. Brutish, dumb, violent, and a plagiarizer.
Yeah, okay. I think probably your professor would qualify for all four of those. Let's start with Dum Dum. He obviously he's as I say, projecting himself into the issue. brutish and dumb. Okay, he's talking about the man who encouraged Alcuin to set up the school of Aachen, under whose aegis the style of writing, uncial, that is the father of our own style of writing, came from. The man who standardized European coinage, pounds, shillings, pence, comes from Charlemagne. The man under whose aegis Gregorian chants spread throughout Western Europe. The man who founded the Cathedral School of Paris, which is the father of the Sorbonne. The man who is in fact the patron of education in France because of his background. See, the problem is those people knew something, you see. They weren't these little paper creatures we have in academia now, who are all mouth and no mind. Yes, I think your professor is projecting himself onto Charlemagne, which I understand. Lesser beings often do that. And I am sure that as a lesser creature, your exercises that option. If I were going to try to rebut the man, which I wouldn't, but if I were going to, I would say, obviously you haven't read any of the contemporary writing, but that's okay, Professor. Secondary sources are much more important, I'm sure. I would recommend, in addition to to the two primary sources, read Dom Guéranger, the liturgical year, the entry on Saint Charlemagne for the 28th of January, this feast day. I wouldn't get into it with your teacher because he has the brutal control of your life over the wielding of grades. And believe me, he won't be afraid to use it because I'm sure he's a brute. The violence that they do to your life through their wielding of the grade book is, proof of what they are. But if you want to go down that particular rabbit hole, you might very sweetly point out to him that we, with our gender confusion and our infanticide, would look far worse to our ancestors than they could to us. Our hands are bloody with the blood of infants and the elderly and the infirm. And we have no right to open our little worthless snouts against men like Charlemagne, especially if we're in the education industry.
Okay. This reminds me of we've received a lot of questions on like this where my professor said, and then
my professor says he's an utter turd. He's right.
And obviously the professor says something stupid, but I showed my brother one of these. And he said something which I enjoyed so much, which was, he said, that would make for a great freshman essay in prompt. Why is this wrong? And truly, I think this would be a great prompt for like AP Euro, sophomore in high school, at least for my school. Okay, this is what the stupid professor said. Do research and report on the, what the score is on here. On Charlemagne. And
another point that should be made, this bit about plagiarism, every ruler who has ever been has had advisors. Because unlike university professors, they're not so stupid as to think they know everything. You see, because they're not morons who think that they're infallible. The truth is that the ability to identify talent and use it in your governance is one of the marks of a good ruler. Nobody can know everything. So what do? You get the best people you can to look after economics, the military, diplomacy, agriculture, and so forth. What, you're supposed to get morons out of a university like the one that our friend apparently goes to? What, you want a jerk like that making decisions? I mean, the guy doesn't even know history and is a professor of medieval history. If he was an economist and his grasp on economics were just as good, everybody in the country would starve. The problem is these people have no talent in any finite, any definable sense. So they go into liberal arts where even if they're total failures, no one will notice.
And there you fail upwards.
Yeah, you fail upwards to become a department head and eventually Prexy at the university. I'm the stupidest guy possible, so I'm the president. God.
That really is how it works. You fail upwards. I mean...
You fail upwards. That's a good phrase. You fail upwards. Yes, indeedy. All the way to the top. You fail all the way up. Yep. I tell you, God bless President Orban. He knows how to deal with universities. Prime Minister Orban, my mistake. What an utter bunch of frauds and phonies. Golly. You know, talk about a shell game. Anyway, but you know, try not to engage with these people. Honestly, just let your eyes glaze over and move on. It's like with wokery. When people start yapping this stuff at me, I just look at them and say, I don't do that, and walk away. Because you know what? No. Bye-bye. Turn it off. And if you're stuck with it, you're stuck in a class or something like that, minimize your participation and get out as quickly as you can. They don't deserve your effort.
Okay. Question from Jason.
All right.
As a convert, Southern Baptist to Anglican to Catholic, I have a few Protestant Bibles and a 1662 Book of Common Prayer. What should I do with them? Is there official church teaching? I believe it was in the Catechism of St. Pius X. I read a Catholic who comes to possess Protestant Bibles or books should burn them. Being that to give them away would be promoting Protestantism, I've since read online that... I've since read online that Protestant Bibles shouldn't be destroyed since they contain the Word of God, even with a faulty translation. Would it be sinful to burn Protestant Bibles? Also, I have my grandfather's Masonic edition of the King James Version, which was given to my father. I know the King James was good enough for Jesus Christ, but I doubt he had a Masonic edition. I have deliverance prayers on the way. Thank you, Vincent. I look forward to putting it to good use. Yes, deliverance prayers, $14.95 in the Tumbler House bookstore, and specifically a prayer to deliver you from the Freemasonic curse if you were a Freemason. So, very important book. I'm very happy it's one of our bestsellers in the store. Okay. Go ahead, Charles. So what do you do with the 1662 Book of Common Prayer?
Well, I wouldn't use it to lead a Holy Communion service, I'll tell you that. You know,
what a strange problem to have.
Yeah, I don't know. Give them to a museum. You know, you inherit mementos of that sort. You know, what if it was your family Bible and it was a King James Bible, and it had all of your family records back to 1612 in it, which is interesting because I don't think it was quite composed that early. But never mind. But no, you've got all your family records in a King James Bible going back to 1770. Obviously, that's not something you want to throw away. Donate them to the special collections of a library if you've got a problem with them. Honestly, this is not something I've really given a lot of thought to.
It's above your pay grade or below your pay grade? or just in some
Neither.
weird space on the 13th floor?
It's on the 13th floor, and I'd go up to have a look, but I'm afraid things don't happen well when I try to get to the 13th floor. Not that I've ever tried.
That would be something. That would be drop it off to Tumbler House, and we'll get some unsuspecting employee to just sort of toss it in there.
I wouldn't do it to an employee. I'd wait until you get audited the next time. Send the IRS man up and tell him that the information he needs is on the 13th floor.
Yeah.
Oh, you're going to want to talk to Mr. Samuels on the 13th floor. He has all those records.
Yep.
And then anybody who comes to the IRS following why you know what became of him, you say, oh, he's on the 13th floor. Send them up.
Yep.
It could become the 13th floor could become an endless reception hall for the Internal Revenue. Absolutely.
That's a brilliant plan, Charles.
Yeah, and then, of course, if anybody comes and says, we demand to see the 13th floor. Gentlemen, we don't have a 13th floor. But Smith called as he was just about to, as the elevator was about to open. Go in yourselves, gentlemen. There's no 13th floor.
All right. Moving on. A question from Michael.
All right.
Greetings, illustrious Charles. And a reverential bow to the inexorable Lord of Tumbler House.
Ooh, that's you.
It is me. I have a question regarding that infamous topic among us young men. That of romantic love. I'm currently studying at small Catholic university, where I found myself deeply attracted to a fellow student in my class. We both frequently attend morning and evening prayer and the rosary, and so we are together relatively frequently. It took me a while, but I finally gathered the courage to express my feelings to her. We had an honest, respectful conversation during which she expressed her appreciation for my friendship and for my kindness toward her. But then she revealed the painful truth. She is committed to becoming a nun in the Carmelite order. I respect her vocation and accept that she is to be Christ's spouse, but I can't help remembering the feelings I had for her and find it difficult to suppress the pain of having to lay her aside. It is especially challenging because the college is very small, so I can't avoid seeing her, even on a daily basis. My question is, what can I do to get over my feelings?
Well, Ladio, I wish I could tell you there was an easy way to do it. There isn't. It's fortunate that before anything had really even begun, she let you know, because it would have been rather more complicated otherwise. So there's that. It's more of a vision or a dream that you've lost than a reality. And that's what you've got to focus on, is the fact that you didn't really have a relationship with her at all. So it's a bit different. But it still hurts, especially when you're young. And if this is one of your earliest, if not your very first great love, it's very difficult. But unfortunately, life is such that there are some pains we just have to go through. You pray, and you remember that our Lord went through a lot worse than we did. We have. Because it's not simply one woman who spurned him. It was the whole human race, all of us. A fact of which he was acutely aware on the cross. So try to offer up the pains you feel to and with him, both for your own sins, the sins of your friends, and for her perseverance as a Carmelite. You know, it takes a lot to become a Carmelite nun. I remember one priest asked a Carmelite superior what she was looking for in vocations. And her response was interesting. She said, courage. Anything else, learning, prayer life, anything like that, I can give them. But they have to have courage. That I cannot supply. So it's a great order that she's chosen. It is a sacrifice on your part, but again, it could be worse. You could have actually had something going and then have her drop this bomb on you, which would have really been bad. And it wouldn't have helped her either. So she played it straight with you. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing. Also, keep your eye out. You know, there are plenty of other fish in the sea. I hate to be blunt, but there are. And you're young enough, your heart will heal more quickly than you think. Now, I would not give that advice quite so quickly had you had a serious relationship with her. In that case, there's nothing stupider you can do than rebounding. But you wouldn't really be rebounding in this case, just checking out what's available. You know. But I wish you well, young man. It's a pain. It is a pain. You know, when I was your age, I fell in love with a chick, but it was the same thing. I mean, it was all in my head first, so to speak, and then it became apparent that it wasn't going to go anywhere, and I felt really broken up. And it seemed like the world was dark. Then all of a sudden I saw this other girl. And we started chatting, and I completely forgot my pain. It was amazing. I was swept off my feet. And then as I went home, I thought to myself, you know something? You're really kind of shallow. You came here this morning to school, and you were ready to check in at Forest Lawn. And now, not 20 minutes conversation with this other girl, and the sky and the clouds have parted. Well, it taught me a lot about myself that day, I can tell you, more than it did about either of the girls. And that's the other thing you should remember. You are getting a course in education in college, and one of the things you're learning about is who you are. You see, we're all different in this area. You're finding out who you yourself are, how you react to these things, and so on. But fear not. If God is meant for you to be married, Miss Right will come along, maybe several of them. So be of good hope. Don't worry about it. You're young. This too shall pass. And one day it'll be a bittersweet memory, and you'll look back and you'll smile even while you feel a little bit of pain, all at the same time. So it won't always be this way. And you may run into someone who you like even more quickly than you think. I hope so. Don't be downhearted.
Picture your Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca, where you have this thing where it's what could have been with this girl, but you had to let her go because what does he say? Two people's problems don't amount to a hill of beans in this world, and it was for the greater good that she go with the man who is basically going to end World War II.
So you're saying if he becomes an integralist, his heart will heal.
Right. But the only way you can become an integralist is to buy our book at at TumblerHouse.com.
Oh, that is sad. Yes, buy the book Integralism, young man, and your heart will heal on its own.
We found a way to navigate from romantic love advice to buying Integralism.
I'm sorry, young man. We don't mean to put you through this.
I'm sorry, too.
That's the cure to all romantic problems. And if you find you fall out of love with a girl, who you know, for whatever reason, you've decided you've got to end it, but you don't want to upset her, you want to let her down gently. You're sitting there at some romantic hideaway, and you say, sweetheart, have we ever spoken about integralism? And then you can pull out the book and begin to read to her.
That is a perfect idea. That's brilliant, actually, Charles.
Yeah, she'll drop you like a hot potato. It'll be great. See?
Wow, that's brilliant. So, but yeah, in order to do that, though, if you're in that scenario, you have to get the book first. So,
and believe me, you just whip that thing out, just the two of you, the candle lights, all this kind of thing. There you are. Look what he says here in chapter 3. Love will be dead, I promise.
All right. Last question for this episode is from the Dwarf of Alexandria. Wow. He says, howdy.
Howdy.
These questions are for either of you. Are there any estimates on how many people have attained the mystical union? Would you share a few that appear to have done so? Is it safe to bet that all of the apostles did so? Thank you both for the great show.
Well, you're very welcome, number one. Number two, that's really very hard to quantify and qualify. The mystical union, for those who don't know, is various writers, various spiritual writers, divide the spiritual life into several different stages. They have different names for it, depends on who you read. But the mystical union, being united with Christ in an almost casual manner, is generally regarded to be the apex. And I couldn't begin to tell you how many people have attained it. The only thing I know for sure is that it's only permanently attained beyond any question of loss when you die, if you die in it. I don't know. I mean, St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila, St. Gertrude the Great, St. Bridget of Sweden, St. Margaret Mary Alacoque. There are a lot of saints you can point to as maybe having had it from time to time. But who knows? I don't think you could really answer that question the way you would like it answered.
Yeah. This area is fascinating to me. That's why I kind of saved it for the end. I know several people who say that they've had this for very short periods of time, where they have this sort of prayer where they're completely immersed and absorbed in God without even sort of like properly meditating on an object or something like that. It's just, I can't even imagine what that feels like, but it's a strange thing. I've always wondered what that's like, because to me, the mystical union would be a consolation of sorts. Like if you're that close and you're communicating on such a high level that it's just sort of, you're absorbed in God, that I don't know how that jives with the dark night of the soul. Because that is sort of, God testing you like he tested Job,
The dark night of the soul, I think, is supposed to precede it. But by the same token, some of the writers will tell you can't look at these things chronologically. So frankly, I don't know. I'm not going to pretend that mysticism or mystical theology is my great forte. It's not.
The some of the saints, see, I always thought it's in tandem because, again, I'm jumbling all the saints in my mind. I don't know if Teresa of Avila said it or John of the Cross in Dark Night of the Soul, but somebody said that sometimes the virtue that you count on, that's been your strength, God rips it away from you so that you don't have dependence on yourself and your virtue, and you don't have an attachment to that strength, that God is teaching you to be totally dependent on him. So even when you're at the highest level, that there are these tremendous afflictions that come and go, in tandem with tremendous consolations. Now, this was the impression that I get. I have no idea what the situation is, but reading a lot of the saints, you get that impression. So I
It's
don't know,
true.
but it's fascinating to me. So
Yeah, it's an interesting area, but I not one I can pronounce on with great assurance. Well,
all right. Well, this has been one of my favorite episodes in a long time. I feel it's really, we really kind of checked off all the boxes that we look for in an episode. We got the wackiness, we got the crazy Charles anecdotes, we've got some heavy duty educational areas from Charles where we're just sort of scooping up all this new knowledge from Charles. We've got some serious items.
well, there is one thing I should say to you, though.
What?
Well, I hope to come home for the summer, as you know. But really, sooner or later, you have got to come over here. You know why?
Because it's beautiful and there's a lot of cool places and
Oh yeah, I mean Austria is wonderful, but
venerate
there's
places. What?
all true, but there's a more pressing reason.
I can't imagine. What is it?
Vienna waits for you.
Oh no! Oh no! Oh no!
Oh yes. Oh yes. You didn't think you were gonna get away with that one Billy Joel reference.
You're giving me PTSD now, like where I'm content and satisfied with this show, and then you just blindside me with a Billy Joel reference after I thought I was safe and sound.
You see, that's how life is. That's how people end up having houses in Hackensack.
Okay, since we're gonna do this, what's funny is that you're delving into the Billy Joel songs and John Cougar Mellencamp. I was actually deeply thinking about these things, believe it or not.
Oh.
And it occurred to no, I'm serious. This is actually going to be interesting. What occurred to me, because I thought it was so weird that you had an affinity for these songs, but I think I've delved into the reason why you like these songs.
Why is that?
Because they're an illusion, and they're a perfect example of the false promises of Americana. Because I looked up, because after we were talking about that, I looked up John Cougar Mellencamp, because I wanted to know what happened to Jack and Diane. Did they live the American dream? Well, John Cougar Mellencamp's on his third wife. That went out the window. And Brenda and Eddie, same thing.
Yeah, Brenda and Eddie were the popular steadies and the king and the queen of the prom.
Exactly. So that is it's very Charles. It's incredibly Charles, where this incredibly Americana thing, but underneath it is this tragedy.
Well, I'm afraid that is the world I have seen. There's a particularly poignant song to me anyway. You know Buddy Holly.
Yeah, of course.
Of course, he died in 58, before I was born.
Right.
The day the music died, 1958. But he has a song, and there are certain things that are, and it's true of both Mellencamp and Billy Joel, that to me seem, certain songs have motifs that are a perennial part of the human experience, particularly the coming of age and realizing that things aren't the way they're presented. Well, Buddy Holly's song, Peggy Sue Got Married, has always struck me as particularly poignant, simply because, he's got the line, I've heard, I don't say that it's true, I'll just leave that up to you. Peggy Sue got married not long ago. There's a girl who's been in nearly every song. This is what I've heard. Of course, the story could be wrong. And basically, Peggy Sue got married today. Well, in my experience, when you're in high school, there's always at least one girl who sort of represents the class in a way, the what it is to be young, to be alive and free and in your teens. And when that girl gets married, that's really the end of your teenagerhood. She's the one, I've been told. Now she's wearing a band of gold. Peggy Sue got married not long ago. And then, now that's when she gets married. Now, if, which God forbid, but sadly today often happens, when she gets divorced, it's not just your teenagerhood that's died, but it's what the teenagerhood was supposed to be replaced by, if that makes sense. In other words, there's a certain bittersweet melancholy about the passing of youth into maturity. But when maturity itself collapses, that's very unhappy making. Now, call me an old sentimental softy, but I have to say that there's nothing sadder in some ways than your classmates when 30 or 40 years have gone by. Especially if you've enjoyed your own life, and so many of them have not. Very poignant. And that's why I think you're right. I didn't know the people upon whom the characters were named, but I do believe I went to school with Brenda and Eddie and Jack and Diane. Even though I wasn't raised in the heartland.
I think that was such a human and poignant dissection that you made there. Really, I feel like an important psychological revelation, and it's sad because it's like we're not allowed to do that in our society. You know what I mean? Like, to reflect in that manner about divorce and maturity in such a, I don't know.
Well, let's put it this way. Life follows natural cycles. And if you're going to get married, it should work that, you've got a period of youth, you attract a mate, you get married, you produce children, you do the very best for them that you can, and then they mature and the cycle repeats. But the whole divorce thing disrupts it, wrecks it.
I think I say that about society, that we're not allowed to do that. For one, because we're not allowed to be nostalgic, and number two, we're not allowed to be critical of our current situation, and number three, we know that the future is always better. I think that's why I say that.
It's funny you say that. I guess one reason why I'm such a nostalgic individual is that when I was young, you got to remember when that was. That was the late 70s, particularly the early 80s, when we had JP2 as Pope, Reagan as president, and it looked as though the worst of the 60s not only had passed, but might be reversed.
Mm.
And there was the prospect of communism falling, and communism did fall. These, and to be honest with you, despite all the crap that's happened since, to have lived through the fall of communism was very heaven. It was, to have that shadow dissipate was amazing. I'll never forget it. But we looked forward to the future. It looked at something as though something good was coming. With the exception of the fall of communism, we were wrong. Drek was coming.
Well, did communism fall?
Yeah.
Well, now it's in China.
Well, it didn't fall in China, and it certainly is going pretty far in the States. But believe me, this close to Eastern Europe, I know the difference. You got to remember, a ton of the people I see every day, had communism not fallen, either would never have been born or would never have been able to come here. I mean, Central Europe is a much better place now than it was under the Reds. And of course, it's one reason why the Hungarians, the Poles, the Czechs, and so forth are a little bit less crazy than we are, because they saw this crap before, all the stuff we're adopting now. They know what it is. It's communism under another name. Oh, but it's not employed by the Soviets. It's brought in by nice academics who condemn the past as, what did moron medieval say, brutish and blah, blah, blah. Whatever he expelled out of his mouth orifice. They've seen all that. They're familiar with that. And it's rot. Utter, complete, total rot, and they know it. And that's why they may very well save us all. Who knows? It's also why it's kind of exciting being here right now, because other than anti-COVID, my jaunts into Hungary and Poland and Czechia and Slovakia and Croatia and so forth have been really eye-opening and a lot of fun beside. Really fallen in love with the peoples of Central Europe, I must say. Although I do miss Jack and Diane and Brenda and Eddie and even Peggy Sue.
Mm.
I may not miss them the way they are now, but I certainly miss them the way they were when we were young.
Yeah.
But I'm surrounded by young people now, both American and Central European, and I can tell you that very, very stimulating, and I have a lot of hope in the generation coming up.
Yeah. All right. So.
All right.
That is it for this episode, everyone. If you'd like to send Charles a question, highly recommend become a patron for as low as $5 a month. Get your questions asked, get access to the pre-show. A lot of good stuff on the pre-show. But that'll do it for this episode. So, were you going to say something, Charles?
Yes, I was. Remember that you're seeing this on Rogation Monday, the first of the 3 Rogation Days. Then will follow on Thursday the Feast of the Ascension, 40 days after Easter. But the following Sunday is Sunday within the Ascension, the octave of the Ascension, and the Sunday after that, the next and last of the 3 gate feasts, Pentecost, is coming up. And that's the end of the Easter season. So you got to get ready for the season after Pentecost. So.
All right. So, I guess one final question for you, Charles.
Tell me.
What is it if it's Monday? Do you know?
Off the menu.
Oh, okay. But what about the soul you save?
upon mature reflection, I think in all likelihood, it may be your own.
All right.
God bless you all, gang. We'll see you next week.